Hey, Dexter here. Today I'm going to be talking about the Aura tier list. These are units that give small buffs to your complete army in the radius of the Aura itself. And starting over at S tier, we have Polar Bear. Slow Aura, by far the best Aura in this game right now. You need multiple of these. I recommend early game 2 or 3. I'm not joking. Mid game even 4 to 5 maybe. If your army really has a lot of DPS, these guys are gonna make you shine. The slow is really good, and if you upgrade it, it actually gets even better. But it costs a lot of food to upgrade. But nonetheless, it's a really solid aura on its own right. Without needing much of a setup, this just works with everything. The only thing it doesn't really work against is range units, because they're just gonna be stationary, standing there and attacking your units while they push into their spawn. So on range units, they're not that great. Next up we have Gyrocopter, which turns into Helicopter. It's a damage increase for all your ranged units. It is a really solid unit because it has range, and that means it's gonna stay alive a lot longer than, let's say, captains, which are melee. You could basically get away with a full range setup, and these guys are just gonna stay alive forever, basically, if you build them properly behind your army. Next up we have Troll, which turns into Troll Champion. It is an attack speed buff. Most people don't really understand how to use it properly, so I'm just gonna quickly explain how to. The Troll basically only gives good amounts of the attack speed buff to units that attack slowly. So if your army is full of insane attack speed units, a Troll is not gonna do much for them. It only really increases the attack speed of slow attacking units, so let's say slaves with 1.0. In mass, a Troll is really good, but if your army is full of units that attack insanely fast, you don't really need a Troll. Next up we have Young Witch Doctor, which turns into Elder Witch Doctor. It is regeneration aura, and it has a really good AoE. You probably won't need more than one of these guys, and they're really good early game, or in general, whenever your army survives and they can rack up in middle. It's a really good unit, and it doesn't cost too much either. Next up we have Tree of Travel, which turns into Tree of Time. I'm actually just talking about Tree of Travel, the unupgraded version, because the upgraded version is essentially a weaker Magnataur, which is an upgraded polar bear. It has 10% less slow, and it costs about the same, but the real carry here is the unupgraded version. Due to the nature, if you spam a lot in this game, this guy's gonna make your army go a lot faster, 30%. So having that on your army is really good if you have a lot of units. Next up we have Halfbreed, which turns into Goliath. The Goliath has an armor aura. It is pretty good, but not that much early game. Adding more units early game will be always better than just dropping one of these expensive guys. This is more like a mid game to late game unit. So don't get these out too early, because it's a huge investment. It doesn't add much if you don't have the right amount of tanks, let's say. Next up we have Mermaid, which turns into Highborne. The Mermaid just has a frost shield on a single target, and the upgraded version, the Highborne, has an AoE regeneration field, which acts similar to the Witch Doctor, except it has downtime and it actually needs to travel to the position it's gonna heal, and the radius is not that great, and it also casts Ice Shield. So it's a bit less range than the Witch Doctor, of course, but it's still a pretty good unit. So keep in mind you need multiple of these, like 2, but spread them out really far so they cover more range. Next up we have Captains. It is essentially a damage aura for everything. It has melee range, and if you don't have the proper build for this guy, it's not gonna matter too much. If you don't have a lot of tanks, these will just die every round quickly. They're not really tanky, they just run to the front line and die basically if you don't have a lot of front line, and their aura range is actually not even big enough for like Zeus or Melee, because they're just gonna simply be standing out of range, and these are just gonna walk towards the enemy creep spawn. So these are basically just for your melee units or low range DPS units. Next up, starting in B tier, we have Gravekeeper, which turns into Apparition. It is super expensive, 450 if you want both of them stacked. The problem is, it is too expensive and it has really no use early game. The minus 15% damage is really gonna ever come into effect on wave 14, let's say, and maybe 17. But besides that, it's a dead investment pretty much. It doesn't do that much. It's way too expensive. Next up we have Disciple, which turns into Messiah. It is the mana regen aura. The reason it's in low B tier because it has not much use, simply. Every unit with an ability like Hades or Maverick actually have an internal cooldown. Everything else doesn't benefit from it. The Fire Archer have unlimited mana. The Hellraiser have infinite mana, they don't benefit. It's just, right now it doesn't do much. I mean, Necros can double summon with these guys, they don't have a cooldown, but Necros are garbage right now, so that's not really an option. Next up we have Garbage tier, and of course, Ice Troll. It's a damage reflect aura. It does nothing early game. If you're lucky enough to get a single damage reflect from these guys in early game, well, that's probably because you're on wave 7. But besides that, it's just not worth it. It actually has an anti-synergy with Halfbreed, because Halfbreed's gonna make your units take less damage, and the reflect is gonna go down by that factor, because your units are just gonna take less damage with Halfbreed. So it isn't too good. You shouldn't really look out for this. Yeah. Next up we have Overseer, and I'm just gonna say it like this: if you have a lot of slaves, it's worth it. Otherwise, it's not worth it. Because the meta right now is a lot of ranged DPS units, and if you're forced to make a lot of frontline, sure, they can help you, but they're really expensive and they don't add really that much to your melee units. And that's gonna be it for the tier lists. Next up, I will be posting gameplay. And thanks for listening, guys. See you around.